Hi folks, this is Tim Garman on NZDP101 for SIT. Just looking at the week 5 work, and this is just going to be an introduction to using select and mask, which will help you with the week 5 exercise. Now, I'm just adding this part of the recording to the start of the select and mask recording, because I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of things. Firstly, I have two files open. Those are the two files we need to work with. This one of Melissa Hobbs and the Azaria and Carr titled image. And I've opened both of these images as smart objects from the file open as smart object option in Photoshop. Now, the Azaria Carr image is a JPEG, so that's just going to open up in Photoshop, and we can see in the layers palette that we have the icon in the layer thumbnail that tells us it's a smart object. I'll do the same thing with the Kate image, Melissa Hobbs, but because this is a RAW file, this is going to open up in Adobe Camera Raw. So it's suggested for all the images that you work on this course that it's expected that you'll do some initial editing and adjustments of exposure and whatever the image needs, or whatever you think the image needs. So we're not going to go into that, but that will just be expected, and you'll need to be watching out for dust spots in the image, things that shouldn't be there, that can easily be retouched. There is one in this image that we're looking at now. But I've opened both of these images up as smart objects, and I've come out of Adobe Camera Raw into Photoshop for the Melissa Hobbs image. Now, in the rest of this video, I don't do that. I'm just using images that I've opened in Photoshop, so they're not smart images. But I really just wanted to draw your attention to one point that's a benefit of working with smart objects on this particular file, because this file, this image of Melissa Hobbs, we're going to need to reduce in size quite a lot. You'll see as you watch the rest of the video that that's the case. Well, reducing in size is not a problem, but when we reduce in size, if we suddenly decided actually it's too small, it needs to come up a bit, we're going to start to degrade the image by increasing it in size, unless it's a smart object. We can go up and down in size without degrading the image if it's a smart object. If it's not, when we blow it up, we'll start to degrade the image. So just be aware of that. That's a good reason for working in smart objects, even if you're not doing any other clever work with Adobe Camera Raw. We can enlarge and reduce images in size without degrading them. So from now on, I'm not working with smart objects in this video, but it is a good idea to do it as a rule of thumb. We're looking at the week 5 task, which is a tutorial for select and mask, just to help you through the week 5 work. And I've got two images open in Photoshop. One is the Azaria and Carr image, and the second one is a portrait of Melissa Hobbs. And the first thing we need to do is flip this over, because she needs to be facing the other way. And we can just do this by going up to image rotation, and flip canvas horizontal. So now she's the right way around. I'm going to copy this into my other file, and on the keyboard I'm going to select Command A, which is select all, and that's on the Mac keyboard. On a PC that would be Control A. So once you've got that selected, we can do a copy and paste. So on the Mac, Command C, on the PC, Control C, and then we'll go to the other image, and Command V, paste, or Control V on the PC. Now, as we can see at the moment, it's huge, much bigger than we want. We can go to the mover tool and move it around, but we actually want to reduce it in size as well. But before we do anything else, you'll just notice in the layer palette we now have 2 layers which we can view. So let's resize this. We'll go up to Edit and Transform and Scale, or we can just do a Command T on the keyboard, or Control T if you're on a PC. So now if you're viewing that, or if you've zoomed in a bit more, you may not see the edge of that bounding box. So you might just want to reduce the image down a bit so you can see it. Command minus I'm using on the Mac, Control minus on the PC. So make sure you can see this box because it's outside the frame of the image. And we're going to reduce it down in size. So we're just going to drag the corner. Now on older versions of Photoshop, you had to hold the Shift key down while you did this to keep the proportions. Otherwise you'd risk stretching or squashing your image. But on more recent versions, I think since 2018 or 19, it does that by default, so you don't need the Shift key. So just bear that in mind. If you're on an older version of Photoshop, you might need to hold the Shift key down to constrain those proportions. But on the newer versions, you just drag down and it's already reducing it in proportion. So just make sure you're not stretching or squashing your image. And we want to see all of her. And you'll notice when you look at the image, or the example in the study guide, it's positioned so that I think part of her ear is just about visible. I'm not looking at the study guide at the moment, but I know that her head goes off the top of the page and we perhaps see a bit more of the shoulder coming in. She's about there. So when we position her correctly, we can double click to apply. And the rest of that image is still available if I move it around. She's in the right place. We need to now remove this wall. So a couple of ways I'm going to treat this. First of all, we'll go to the tool palette and choose select or quick selection, or the quick selection tool, and make sure you've got the right layer selected. At the moment neither of my layers are highlighted, and that's why my quick selection tool won't work. I need to make sure that I select the top layer, and then I can just pass that over her and I get a rough and ready selection, and I can go up to the edge, but you see it won't really grab it perfectly. But that's okay, because at this stage all we need is a rough selection. Now you notice with that quick selection tool I have control over brush sizes and hardness isn't going to help us really at the moment, but brush size might if you're trying to select a smaller area. So the other thing I can do, you'll notice in the brush size cursor there's a plus symbol. If I hold my Option key down on a Mac, on a PC it'll be Alt, that turns to a minus. So I can just click any bits that I've missed or haven't quite got right. When you do this, because of the artificial intelligence in Photoshop, it starts to understand what kind of area you're trying to isolate. So just depending on whether you're clicking inside her image or outside, inside you'll want to be not holding the Option key down or the Alt key. On the outside, if you want to just trim it, just hold the Alt or Option key down. So we've got a rough selection there. The next thing we can do is come over to our layers palette, and at the bottom we've got a list of tools, and we want to create a mask. So we're going to click the Add Layer Mask, and as soon as we do that, we notice that the wall disappears. Now what we want to try and do is improve this line where we've chopped that wall away. Now when we've added that mask, you can see on the thumbnail it indicates that this area has been masked out where the wall was, and up in the control strip, or the option strip I should say, it used to be called the control strip, we've got a select and mask option. I can also go up to the select menu, and you've got select and mask there as well. And we've got a select subject option. I'll come back to that later in this video. So let's now use this select and mask button up the top, and straight away we're led into the select and mask window. And over on the right we've got some controls. In fact, let's close these down just in case you're viewing them like that. At the top we've got a view mode, and that's quite useful. Let's start on the first setting, and what this is doing is simply viewing the layer and its mask in different ways. So we can see that that background, the bit that's masked out, is just slightly transparent there, and we can in fact adjust that transparency to just to help us see how that's working, or we can view it not there at all and we just see the selection. So that's called marching ants, because that's what they look like, showing our selection around the hair. Or we can look at a mask in red, and again we can adjust the opacity so we can see exactly what that edge looks like. And also we could, if we wanted to, we could change the color of that mask by clicking in here. Now we've also got here an option to view the masked area or the selected area, so whichever is more helpful to you. Coming down through these different views, we've got one that's on black or grey, and again we can change the opacity of that. We've got one on white, and again we can adjust how we view that. We've got one on black. Well, that has no adjustment because it's simply black and white, and when you've got a lot of detail in the edge, that's actually quite a useful view to have a look at. Lastly, we've got one that just shows us the two layers. So take your pick on which one you might like to use. I think I'm going to go for the red one and just up the opacity a little bit. It does define that edge quite well. Now we're going to make some further setting changes here, and this button, remember settings, is quite useful because if we jump back into Photoshop, we can come back into select and mask, and the adjustments that we've made will still be there, so we can go and make further refinements. So let's open up these tabs, and we've got a couple of options here: object aware and color aware. So that's rather going to depend on what your background's like. If you've got a complex background, and I would say this is a fairly complex background, I would suggest be on the object aware setting. But if you're cutting something out or away from a background that's pretty simple, perhaps a fairly solid color, you might do better to have it on the color aware setting. But you can, if we go to this one, it'll just tell us that we might get a different edge. Doesn't appear to be very different, but you can skip back between the two if necessary. Now I'm going to take us over, before we look further down that right side, I'm going to look at the tools on the left, because we've got a quick selection tool, we've got a refine edge tool, and we've got a simple brush tool and an object selection tool, and we've got lasso and polygonal lasso tool, which you'll recognize from the Photoshop window, and a hand tool and zoom tool. Probably the refine edge tool is the favorite, because we can actually come down this edge and you'll find that that will begin to refine it further. Now again, we've got an option for add or subtract. If I hold the Option or Alt key down, and go down that again, you might find that it puts a bit more back in. Now where you've got perhaps a small area in the corner there that Photoshop doesn't appear to be selecting very successfully, we can go to the brush tool and we'll want to have the Alt key or the Option key held down just to paint that in. If we don't have the Alt or Option key held down, it removes from the mask. But that's a way we can just add a few refinements. Now at this point, we could say, well, I'm actually happy with that. In which case, we just want to come down here, and we've got a decontaminate colors option, which might just help to refine that edge a bit further and remove any aberrations that there might be. But lastly, we've got an output option, and by default it's set to new layer with layer mask, and I'd recommend that probably that's the best option, but there are some other options there. Now interestingly, you can save it to a new document. Now that could have some benefits depending on how you're working, because you can save layers in Photoshop to a new document, work on them separately, and then save them back into your document. So that's quite useful, and you can do the same thing here. So you've got some other options, saving as a new layer, etc. But this is going to repeat what we've already got. So if I went OK, you see that edge has been now finished with the wall removed, and in our layers palette we've got a duplicate layer, so it's saved it as a new layer with mask. You remember when we started off, we created a layer mask, and it's given us a new refined one now, so we could go back to the old one. We've got a copy there if we wanted to, and sometimes it's even useful to use both of them on top of each other to give different effects or refine the selection slightly more. So I can go back into Select and Mask and do some further work. Because we've clicked this Remember Settings button, all the settings are still there. So let's have a look at some of these options down the right. We've got under Edge Detection, we've got a radius option. If you notice where that edge is down the hair, if I move this radius option, you'll begin to see it move only fractionally, but that has actually moved slightly. And so that's basically selecting a larger area. And if we click the Smart Radius button, we hopefully see it identifying what the edge is that we're trying to select, and probably somewhere near the left-hand edge would be better. Looking at global refinements, so where edge detection is specific to the edge, we can smooth that edge of our mask. We can feather the edge, which that will have an effect because it's just basically going to soften that edge that we've already got there. Contrast can be helpful because that helps to define the edge from the background that it's against, and shifting the edge is really just shifting it one way or the other, so into the hair or away from the hair, depending on how much we select. So you can see that that is moving quite a bit. Now we can obviously clear the selection that we've got or invert it. Not particularly helpful for what we're looking for. And then, as I mentioned previously, the output settings are as we see them there. So that is Select and Mask. Just go up and have a look at the Refine Hair option. And as I mouse over that, it says may yield best results with Object Aware Refine mode, which we have selected, and that would be the mode that I'd recommend for a complex background anyway. So let's see what happens when we click the refine here. And in fact, before I do it, I think I might just put it on a different setting. Which one? Let's go for this one. Okay, so now you see there it has added some hair in that we'd missed. So it's identifying a better line for that, the edge of that hair. Now I've come out of select a mask and just gone in and deleted our previous masks, just so that I can show you the last button here, which is in the option strip, the select subject button. So let's see what happens when we click this. So this is replacing manually selecting the subject with the quick mask tool, which is quick selection tool, which is there. So it's done a pretty good job of identifying the area for us. So we can then go back through and create our mask as we had done previously, and then go back into select a mask and refine this edge again.